fulfilling. And this is what I've been trying to allude to in several of my comments before. But basically, the pendulum is swinging all the time. And remember, during the Dark Ages, the pendulum had been swinging so much to conservatism, so much to religion, so much to the church, so much to all of that, that eventually, because of the oppressive power of the church, as unity of church and state had occurred, it was so interesting that as the Enlightenment period came, the 1700s and the 1800s, the pendulum in the western part of the world has been swinging it all the way back to ultra-liberalism. Fascinating stuff. Absolutely fascinating stuff. And the ultra-liberalism is something that we are going to come back to several times in this presentation. So you have the political right and you have the political left, and the pendulum is swinging. The pendulum is swinging. And we are going to see how the pendulum from ultra-liberalism is going to go back to ultra-conservatism. Where we have separation of church and state, we are going to go back to the unity of church and state. And probably the Paris Olympics, if you have been watching the opening ceremony, you can clearly see how the ultra-liberalism mindset is so rampant in Western culture. Whether that was a denigration of the Lord's Supper or not, I'm not going to go into that debate. But it was truly a pagan feast that was presented. And Christians are seeing something is happening. And many people in society are seeing that people are just, what has happened? What is going on? So there are social problems in society as we are seeing the ultra-liberalism going forward in society. You have LGBTQ plus agenda going forward, where many Christians are feeling, to be honest, that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, but even these fundamental definitions of biology, we can just change it because of the liberal mindset, the autonomy of trying to liberating oneself from whatever statements or definitions which may seem to be coercive or oppressive. Of course, the LGBTQ plus agenda is gaining ground and is getting into schools. So Christians, and I would say many common sense people, are saying that I don't want my children to be taught that kind of sexual philosophy. I want to have the only right as a parent to give to my son, my daughter, what is true about this topic. Likewise, cultural Marxism and woke ideology is so much present in our society. And there is the cancel culture, mainstream media bias, censorship, the economy, and on and on and on. We could go and present to you many other topics where we see that the pendulum is swinging, but as we are going to see, there is a reaction. In the polarization, there is a reaction. And the question that we are going to ask ourselves in the next part of the presentation, what is the solution that conservative thinkers give to these social problems? That is going to be our next part in this presentation, because Trump, believe it or not, is a major factor in how society is not only getting more polarized, but all the ideological factors that is happening here, how the pendulum is swinging back. Listen to this very interesting comment.
Are you concerned that Trump might be elected again shortly?
I think it's very likely. And if it happens, it is likely to be the kind of like the death blow to what remains of the global order. And he says it openly. Now, again, it should be clear that many of these politicians, they present a false dichotomy, a false binary vision of the world, as if you have to choose between patriotism and globalism, between being loyal to your nation and being loyal to some kind of, I don't know, global government or whatever.
Fascinating stuff. Trump is going to bring about an end to the global order if he is going to be elected. Fascinating stuff. What's the global order? The global order is the liberalism which they perceive, this man perceives it as a good thing, but this new political ideology, as we are going to see, is absolutely amazing. You see, what happened in 2015 and 2016, first in Brexit, and then with the MAGA movement of Trump, and of course all the conservative parties that have gained momentum in other parts of the Western world, and likewise in South America and Central America, is a political earthquake. What has been the mainstream ideas has been completely challenged, and that is what we are seeing here. And we are going to go in this presentation to the post-liberal order, a new society built upon the common good. Now, what's the post-liberal society? Now, basically, it is saying that the liberal project, which has been focusing on individualism, it has gone so far towards this extreme part that many of the reasons why we have a society like we have with all the social problems is embedded in the liberal project, where we see only its natural consequences coming about. And they are saying that, no, we need to create now a post-liberal project. And instead of focusing on individualism, now we have to focus on the common good. We have to focus on the greater good. We have to focus on the welfare of the society, where we, each of us, make up together that the total well-being of others. I'm not questioning that they are skeptical towards individualism, but we must remember that liberalism was, as I'm going to show to you, a natural consequence of the tyranny and totalitarianism during the Dark Ages, which we should be thankful for. And what is this post-liberal society? Now, you cannot talk about the post-liberal society and not mention Viktor Orban in Hungary. Hungary is leading the Europe, basically, in the post-liberal thinking. He said in 2019, Europe can only be saved by returning to Christianity. Do you see the pendulum? We have been on the ultra-liberalism side, and if we want to save our societies, we must go back. We must go back. He said Christianity is not only a religion, but it's also a what? Culture, on which we have built a whole civilization. So Viktor Orban, on the political right, is embracing Christianity, and he says that if we want to have Europe, if we want to have our nations, we must embrace Christianity. My question is that a good or a bad thing? Could it be that the solution to the many problems that we actually see in society, that the solution is going to be worse than the problem itself? Could it be that we are actually have forgotten history, we have forgotten what has happened before, and that we are simply repeating the same mistakes that we should have long ago learned? So Orban, Christianity has to be embraced, otherwise it's over. Here's another person. Ayaan Hirsi Ali wrote in an opinion article at Unheard, 2023 November, why I am now a Christian. Atheism cannot equip us for what? Civilizational war. Fascinating. If you know a little bit about this woman, she was raised as a Muslim, but as she grew up, she became an atheist. And she actually joined hands with Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens and Daniel Dennett. This is the new atheism, remember, almost 20 years ago. And she was presenting to the people how Islam is not a religion of peace. And she was part of this new atheism movement, but she realized that atheism cannot give you existential satisfaction. It leaves you empty. It doesn't give you a big narrative. It doesn't give you meaning and purpose. It doesn't give you any of that. And she was having all kinds of mental problems and depression and anxiety. And she discovered that maybe if I give Christianity a chance, it's going to be my personal problems are going to be solved, and I'm going to get answers to my problems. Now, I'm very happy for her that she has become a Christian. I'm not presenting this to you. But notice one of the reasons why she also became a Christian. It's more than the personal decision. It's a cultural decision. It's going from the ultra-liberalism to going back to some form of conservatism, cultural Christianity. Listen to how she argued. So what changed? Why do I call myself a Christian now? Part of the answer is global. Western civilization is under threat from three different but related forces. The resurgence of great power, authoritarianism, and expansionism in the forms of Chinese Communist Party and Vladimir Putin's Russia. The rise of global Islamism, which threatens to mobilize a vast population against the West, and the viral spread of woke ideology, which is eating into the moral fiber of the next generation. So she says there are three global threats, and in order for the secular West to survive, it must embrace Christianity. Fascinating stuff. So you have Viktor Orban on the one hand, political right, says if Europe must survive, it has to embrace Christianity. This woman, whom I probably would not put into the same political category and spectrum as Orban, especially if she was coming from atheism, right, from the new atheistic movement, which is more on the left side, more liberal side, she says that it's a suicide project. It will not happen because it only creates this vacuum. And these powers are going to try to fill it. And the only way, she says, West can survive is to have Christianity. This is how she said it. She said, but we can't fight off these formidable forces unless we can answer the question, what is it that unites us? The response that God is dead, the atheist, in other words, seems insufficient. So too does the attempt to find solace in the rules-based liberal international order. The only credible answer, I believe, lies in our desire to uphold the legacy of the Judeo-Christian what? Tradition. Judeo-Christian tradition. But my question is, what kind of Christianity is that? It is none other than the Catholicism during the Middle Ages. And that is something that Europe fled from, and now we are going back to it. Remember what prophecy said? All the world will wander after the beast. People are going to accept the moral and spiritual authority of the papacy. That which was will happen again. And I wish people would see that the solution to the problem is not necessarily the best solution to it. So my friends, welcome to the post-liberal order. One of the most famous academics, at least one of the most popular academics who has been writing about the post-liberal order is Patrick Deneen. And he wrote his book in 2018 called Why Liberalism failed. And this book was a very, very popular book. Even Barack Obama actually says, I agree with most of what the analysis of what he says. And basically says, liberalism as a project has failed. And that's why he was arguing, if we can go to the screen again, in his second book, came out 2022-23, Regime Change Toward a Post-Liberal Future. So the regime must change. But it's not just a political party, he says. He says the entire regime must change. The ideology of liberalism, according to him, is into the very, very fabric of the political parties, and there must be a regime change. And the solution is a post-liberal order. Orban said it. The woman that I was quoting from, Al-Harsi, said, we need Christianity. Now, my question is, how does he define post-liberal future? Because, as I'm going to show to you in this remaining parts of the presentation, it is not only the future, but many of the leading politicians today are embracing him. And I'm, of course, talk about conservative politicians. He said in an article from Politico last year, I don't want to violently overthrow the government. I want something far more revolutionary. Republican politicians are embracing the post-liberal ideas of Patrick Deneen. But just what is he calling for? And he's basically arguing, I'm trying to explain here, that the progressive left and the progressive right, conservative right, excuse me, he's saying that all of them today are united by liberalism. But he says, this is not how we are supposed to look at it. The country is split into two warring camps. He says there is the Party of Progress, a group of liberal and conservative elites who advocate for social and economic progress. Now, what does he mean by this? What he means by this is that progress is the project of liberalism. In other words, it has to be better and going forward and giving new rights to people and so on and so on and so on. But there is another form. And then there is the Party of Order. It's a coalition of non-elites who support a populist agenda. That would be Donald Trump, that would be many of the other conservative parties, that combines, listen to this, support for unions. Now that's interesting. Support for unions have usually come from left-leaning politicians. A robust checks on corporate power with extensive limits on abortion. A prominent role for religion in the public sphere, and far-reaching efforts to eradicate wokeness. In his new book, Regime Change, out this month, Deneen calls on anti-liberal elites to join forces with the Party of Order to wrest control of political and cultural institutions from the Party of Progress, ushering in a new non-liberal regime that Deneen and his allies on the right call the post-liberal order. So you have you have a new right. You have a post-liberal right-leaning parties, ideologies, politicians that are basically saying that religion, which was put into the private sphere during the project of liberalism, it has to be taken out of the private life and once again enter into the public life, just as it was during the Middle Ages. And I believe that religion can play a role in public life, but to unite church and state is where we are, what I'm going to see as this is where it is leading. Now, interestingly, as he was holding this presentation, there are three fascinating people on this picture. You have Deneen here, and to the right is a man by the name of J.D. Vance. Now he is the vice president nominee or candidate with Donald Trump. I'm going to show to you that they have fascinating links. And then you have a man behind him, Kevin Roberts, who is the president of Heritage Foundation. Now they have been together in 2022-23 was a seminar and presentation held at a certain university called Regime Change, the name of the book, and the Future of Liberalism. And there you have Patrick Deneen in the middle, Kevin Roberts, the president of Heritage Foundation and the Project 2025 piece that they have put together, and J.D. Vance were all there united. And what they all have in common is that all three of them are Catholics. Now listen to how Deneen describes at another conference that I'm going to present to you later on, what the post-liberal project is about.
And you've heard already, and I suspect you'll hear throughout the conference, a critique of liberalism as the thing we are against. And I just wanted to take an opportunity to make clear that I think what distinguishes, or what I see as distinguishing this project, the Bonum Commune Foundation, this conference, is that it's actually not really about what we're against. You'll hear a good deal of that, but I just want to give you a kind of cautionary note, not to confuse what will be critiques with actually what the actual project is. And the actual project is positive, it's creative, it seeks to build, it seeks to affect and realize the common good. Common in some senses, in both senses of that word, that which is ordinary and that which is shared. And in many respects, what we're calling for is a kind of the idea of the common good as a kind of gratuitous project, something that can be graciously shared widely as a kind of public utility. What we want to do is to give, in some ways, a vision of the good that we should orient ourselves toward.
So the vision of the post-liberal project is not focused on individualism, as I said, the self. It is now focused on the common good. It is the society. It is the welfare of the makes us together. And the vision is for this good. That is the orientation. That is what society must come back to. And that word common good is a phrase that can be explained and understood from different angles and from different political and religious ideologies. You have a certain ideology which makes you interpret common good in a certain way. But we have to understand that this post-liberal project, as Deneen is setting it forth, he's doing it from a Catholic perspective. And mostly a common good vision for life and vision for society has been situated in a Catholic vision of the world. That doesn't mean that Protestants have not understood the common good, but it has traditionally been that the individual right is to be understood and then the common good. They are not necessarily antithetical towards each other. They are not enemies. They can be powerfully and beautifully go together, but what is the common good in a Catholic perspective? Now we have to ask ourselves the question, common good or liberty of conscience? Why is this an important question? You see, as the Catholic Church was oppressing, and as the Catholic Church was basically having so much power in Europe, in the western part of the world, what was happening, my friends, is that people that were not going along the mainstream of society, what was happening was that they had no conscience, they had no liberty of conscience. There was no religious freedom. There was no anything of it because dissenters had to be persecuted. They were heretics, remember? They had by choice taken the decision not to go against it. So there is an important part of liberalism where every individual has the right to choose. to believe in God or not to believe in God, or whatever religion or God or whatever people want to believe in. Now you see, the Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches today that the common good resides in the conditions for the exercise of the natural freedoms indispensable to the development of the human vocation, such as the right to act according to a sound norm of conscience and to safeguard privacy and rightful freedom also in matters of religion. You read this and you think to yourself, now that sounds good. Who doesn't want to have that kind of a vision for a society? After all, common good, who doesn't want to help society? And people who do not want to help society, especially in a crisis events, are considered to be selfish. But we have to remember that phrases are important to understand. So the question we are asking is, who decides what a sound norm of conscience is, or rightful freedom also in matters of religion? You see, it's a very critical question to ask. Who decides? Now, if you have lived in the western part of the world for a long period of time, you would say, I would do it. But you see, that's a liberal mindset. And it's a good liberal mindset because you are the individual and you are looking at it, and in a Christian perspective, you would also apply that to your relationship with God as He has revealed it in the Bible, as the Holy Spirit leads you. That would be the Protestant way of understanding it, not the Catholic. Who is it that decides the sound norm of conscience, which is important for common good? Well, that would be the Church, particularly the Pope, who is an absolute monarch, who is claiming infallibility, by virtue of papal office, claims to be God on earth. He has monopoly on truth. You see, the Communist Constitution of 1936 also claimed to protect freedom of religion and conscience, but did it really do it? It didn't really do it. So here we see that totalitarian governments and ideologies can use certain phrases, but they actually don't mean that. Or there is a certain approach which you have to understand it. And just as in the Communist Constitution, it is only in that system, if you were belonging to the communist system, that there was religious freedom for you, so also during the Middle Ages, so also during the Dark Ages. As long as you accepted what the Church taught, as long as you accepted what the Pope taught on an issue, you had freedom of conscience. And you were serving the common good. It's interesting that in the Second Vatican Council, we are told that the Pope proclaims in an absolute decision a doctrine pertaining to faith and morals. For that reason, his definitions are rightly said to be irreformable. The faithful, for their part, are obliged to submit to their bishop's decision, made in the name of Christ in matters of faith and morals, and to adhere to it with a ready and respectful allegiance of mind. This loyal submission of the will and intellect must be given in a special way to the authentic teaching authority of the Roman Pontiff, even when he does not speak ex cathedra. Wow. So in other words, you are to submit your mind and your will to a human being who is in this particular leading position. But that's not the Protestant understanding of religious liberty, and also as it has to do with the common good. The Protestant allegiance is only to God. It's only to our Savior. It's only to Him who is our Redeemer, our King, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Only to Him do I submit. And I submit to what He has revealed in Scripture. And also He is leading His church forward. But we do not submit to one individual. That's the Catholic mindset. And so when Deneen says that we are going to establish it on the common good, this is what we have to understand, my friends. This is where it has been, and some way this is where it is going. Now, the encyclical letter of Pope Leo the 13th wrote in 1888 an encyclical letter called Libertas, on the nature of human liberty. How has the Catholic Church understood liberty of conscience, religious liberty, the common good? Listen to what he said. To make this more evident, the growth of liberty ascribed to our age must be considered apart in its various details. And first, let us examine that liberty in individuals, which is so opposed to the virtue of religion, that's interesting, namely the liberty of worship, as it is called. This is based on the principle that every man is free to profess as he may choose any religion or none. And what the Pope is continuing to write in the encyclical is that you do not have the liberty of worship. You do not have the liberty to profess for yourself what it is. Why? Because you have to submit the will and the mind to Him. And anybody who doesn't do that does not have the liberty for it. Point 21 is a continuation of the liberty of worship. Wherefore civil society must acknowledge God as its founder and parent. You're going to see that this is what the Protestant version of post-liberal order is saying. We're going to see that. And must obey and reverence his power and authority. Justice therefore forbids, and reason itself forbids, the state to be godless. Or to adopt a line of action which would end in godlessness, namely, to treat the various religions, as they call them, alike, and to bestow upon them promiscuously equal rights and privileges. Wow! The Catholic Church has historically not believed in religious liberty as Protestant America has understood through the project of liberalism. It has said that there has to be no established religion, remember the First Amendment, and that every individual has the right for himself or for herself to be a believer in God or not. Pope Leo the 13th says, no, there is no secularity with Catholicism. Since then, the profession of one religion is necessary in the state. That religion must be professed, which alone is true, and which can be recognized without difficulty, especially in Catholic states, because the marks of truth are, as it were, engravers upon it. This religion, therefore, the rulers of the state must preserve and protect, if they would provide, as they should do, with prudence and usefulness for the good of the community. But when is the good of the community followed? When the state protects the what? The church. When the state protects the religion. When the state protects what the Pope has taught, then there is the good of the community. Do you see that? That's the common good, as I'm going to show to you, what the post-liberal order is eventually going to go to. Point 23 says, we must now consider briefly liberty of speech and liberty of the press. Question to you. Do you like liberty of speech? Do you like liberty of press? I hope you do. I do it. I like that. Listen to what the Catholic vision is. It is hardly necessary to say that there can be no such right as this if it be not used in moderation, and if it pass beyond the bounds and end of all true liberty. What is true liberty according to the Pope? It is that you recognize that the only freedom is by following the Catholic definition of the papacy. Point number 30. Another liberty is widely advocated, namely what? Liberty of conscience. If by this is meant that everyone may, as he chooses, worship God or not, it is sufficiently refuted by the arguments already adduced. So question, has the Catholic Church historically believed in liberty of speech, of the press, liberty of worship, liberty of conscience? Pope Leo in 1888, more than 100 years after America signs, the Constitution and all of that, it says that no, we have a completely other project. Why? Because America was founded upon the principle of this wonderful project of true liberalism. And the Catholic Church says we oppose it as much as we can. Fascinating stuff. Liberty of conscience is the individual right, irregardless of what the common good thinks. You see? If conscience is so important when it comes to worship, how I worship God, and when I worship God, and what I worship, and so on, I have that individual right, and nobody can take that from me. Nobody can force me. Nobody can claim that I can be persecuted, because I have that. That is a God-given right that God has given to me. But He's never going to force me. He's never going to oppress me. He's never going to force me into the truth. He will lead me by His love. What about Protestantism? Martin Luther said that the spiritual power, that is the church, is to reign only over the soul, seeing to it that it comes to baptism and the sacrament of the altar, to the gospel and true faith, over which matters emperors and kings have no jurisdiction. What did Pope Leo XIII say? The state must in everything ensure that the religion is protected, it is supported, and that is for the good of the community. Martin Luther, a Protestant vision of the common good and of a society, says the king and the emperor has no any business in all of that. Just so we clergymen have no command to take people by the neck if they will not listen to us. We should learn to separate spiritual and temporal power from each other as far as heaven and earth, for the Pope has greatly obscured this matter and has mixed the two powers. Luther was a liberal. Now, I do recognize that Luther did not live up to the ideals of what the Bible has taught on this issue. I recognize that Luther has made many mistakes, and the way he has treated certain people and groups and so on. But in essence, in ideology, Martin Luther believed in the Protestant version of, what did we just read? We read that we should learn to separate spiritual and temporal power. What do we call that? We call that the separation of church and state. It's the separation of church and state. It is a Protestant heritage that we have. And the Protestants that were fleeing from Europe, they eventually found a place of security in America. But even that, the colonies, many of the Puritans, they were persecuted in Europe, and then they established churches and religion in the colonies and persecuted dissenters. They made the same mistake. And so Roger Williams in the 1600s came about, and he says, and he laid the foundation in the Protestant American heritage of the separation of church and state. The first 4 commandments of the Decalogue, of the 10 commandments, we are not to legislate that. That has been this heritage that we have had. And that Protestant heritage, together with other Enlightenment heritage, because the Founding Fathers were a project of their times, basically. They were children of their time. They brought also with them Enlightenment values, of course. But separation of church and state is a direct result of the oppression of the Catholic Church. And this is, unfortunately, what American Protestantism is going to make in the future. Now, the Adventist view of this is very important. Ellen White said, the exercise of force is contrary to the principles of God's government. He desires only the service of love, and love cannot be commanded. It cannot be won by force or authority. Only by love is love awakened. To know God is to love Him. She says, every human being in body, soul, and spirit is the property of God. Christ died to redeem all. Nothing can be more offensive to God than for man, through religious bigotry, to bring suffering upon those who are the purchase of the Savior's blood. This is very strong language. She says in The Great Controversy, God takes no pleasure in a forced allegiance, and to all He grants freedom of will, that they may render Him what? Voluntary service. Basically, God does not force us to do. God wants us to choose Him from the inward, because He has given us a new heart, because He is good to us. We want to be good to Him. And the Desire of Ages says, compelling power is found only under Satan's government. The Lord's principles are not of this matter. His authority rests upon goodness, mercy, and love. And the presentation of these principles is the means to be used. God's government is moral, and truth and love are to be the prevailing power. Once again, the problem during the Dark Ages was the unity of church and state, where religion was forced upon the people. And anybody who was outside the mainstream, they were dissenters, and they had to be persecuted. But what did we just read? Compelling power is found only under Satan's government. We see the spirit of the dragon during the Dark Ages, the first beast, and then the Bible says the second beast in Revelation 13. It looks like a lamb. It claims to be Christ-like. It claims to stand upon Christian principles. It even claims to be a Christian nation. But prophecy said it will speak like a dragon. The dragon, a draconian powers and oppressive legislation, where it is going to be about worship. Worship. Now let's see with this understanding Deneen's view of liberalism.
So to shore up a kind of a society that sees itself as engaged in a civilizational project, those leading the society need to be especially cognizant of how they give that sense of long-term, even eternity. And he says, through this, he said, there will be a long detour back to faith.
System. Something I've always been intrigued by is go back to the 19th century, and there are voices in America, not just bigots, not just simple-minded, bigoted people, but thoughtful people who looked at the emerging Catholicism in America and said, "Wait a minute, that's not our thing. That's antipathetic to America." And when I was coming of age, like, oh, those people back there, they were so anti-Catholic. Well, in a way, weren't they right? And in perceiving, the Catholic vision is different from the Hobbesian, Lockean, Jeffersonian vision of liberalism. It's a different worldview. They have a different relationship to nature and to culture and all of that. Yeah. They weren't entirely wrong, in other words, in being wary of this new Catholic vision of life.
I think that's right. I mean, I think those critiques were right, and of course they go all the way back to the foundation of liberalism, which was founded as explicitly as anti-Catholic. Right. Hobbes is clear about this. Locke is clear about this.
Locke is pretty clear about it.
Locke says, we'll tolerate any religion except we won't tolerate atheists because we can't trust them.
Yeah.
And we won't tolerate Catholics because they pay feasance to a foreign potentate. They believe that the Pope, it transcends any secular order or what the Pope represents. So at the very roots of liberalism is a kind of anti-Catholicism.
That's a fascinating admission, both from the Catholic Bishop Barron and also from Professor Deneen. Liberalism, and obviously what you have heard, is the Enlightenment version of liberalism, but likewise the Protestant version of liberalism, where once again the person has the freedom, the liberty to choose for him or herself how he's going to worship God or not. They are saying that this type of liberalism was actually anti-Catholic. And it is true. I have just shown to you that Catholicism, even up to Pope Leo XIII, was arguing against liberalism and saying that the post-liberal order is instead going to be founded upon the common good. It's telling me that something is very wrong. Let's see another clip from Professor Deneen. Here he is having a podcast interview with Al Mohler, whom we are going to come to also in this presentation. He is the president of a seminary and theological seminary, Southern Baptist Seminary, and he's coming to the end of the interview, and listen to what he said.
In this, I want to end in an unusual way by asking you, if you're speaking to me as you are, and we know who we are, both of us, what do you think is the hardest question you would pose to me? In other words, or to American evangelicalism, American Protestant, confessional Protestantism? What is the hardest question you would pose? What is it that we're not seeing?
Well, I guess here I would ask a question as a Catholic to someone who I having spoken to now twice for some length, I find to be very much a kindred spirit. And yet, when I engage in a critique of liberalism, it often seems that by extension I'm engaged in a certain critique of Protestantism as well. In other words, the tendency toward fragmentation of individualism, of self-assertion, of a more of a concept of the human being that begins at the level of the individual and the individual exercising choice as the primary self-understanding. How much of liberalism can be ultimately sort of separated from Protestantism?
So in the previous clip, I showed to you in the interview that he saw liberalism as anti-Catholic. And in this interview, he's saying that, well, if I could give you, if I could trample you on the toes, basically, I would say that a critique of liberalism also includes a critique of Protestantism. And Protestantism, did you see how he phrased it? It has the ability and the freedom to choose. And that's the main problem, because the individual is in the centrum. But remember, in the other one, it is the common good. So liberalism as a project, and it has especially to do with the freedom to choose for yourself, irregardless of how people are around you, it has to disappear. And so in the interview, as they are finishing the podcast, Deneen says something very prophetic.
And this is something I worry deeply about, because if you and those who believe such as you are not the source of renewal in America, I'm not sure that the remnant Catholics who are still Catholic are going to be able to pull us over the finish line either.
Yeah, I don't think you'd be surprised. I am a confessional Protestant. And by the way, I did part of my doctoral study in a Roman Catholic institution studying Roman Catholic theological method. So, I say this with respect. I think that the problem with part of that is that the Roman Catholic Church has not maintained what the project and authority that it had, claimed. I'd say, Pope Francis is a pretty good response by any conservative Protestant to all this. And I don't say that dismissively, and I don't say this without a sense of tragedy. Mm-hmm. But I just want to say, I think the renewal that's coming, at least in confessing Protestantism, is the understanding that the excesses of Protestant individualism are just as fatal as Protestant liberalism.
And moreover, I find it encouraging that maybe because of the unfortunateness of our times, in conversation with you, I find much more of a kindred spirit than maybe our grandparents might have. So that's a happy consequence of maybe sorrowful times that we live in.
Well, and it is also something that I believe makes me more faithful, even as a confessional Protestant, and thinking these things through honestly.
Did you notice two important commentaries on this? Number one, Deneen was saying that if there is no revival of Protestantism in the country, we are going to lose this country forever. And the second point was what Muller was saying, is that he says that not only is Protestant liberalism dangerous, which I believe it is. Now, when he says Protestant liberalism, we have to understand it in the sense of not understanding the Bible as God's word and critiquing it with higher critiquing methods and so on and so on. But he says that Protestant individualism is as dangerous as that. So what we are seeing here, my friends, is that a significant Protestant leader is buying into this, I believe, very dangerous ideology and philosophy. Deneen was speaker at a conference called National Conservatism, and that's a conference that I'm going to repeatedly come back to after this part now, because many things are happening. One of the forms of a post-liberal order is that is what the National Conservatism is embodying. And listen to what he said.
As the young people like to say, it's time to take the red pill. We must see this jointly created, invented tradition of America as a fundamentally or solely liberal nation as a recent innovation that is in fact a departure from the actual American tradition. It is an invented tradition that has been launched in the service of a rapacious ruling class and which is benefiting from its rewards. As conservatives, we are charged with remembering the past, even as we build a future that draws from a genuinely American tradition. This nation was not founded to liberate us from each other, to make us mutually indifferent, and to put us on the path of a national self-immolation, but to preserve a number of pre-liberal legacies of practices and of beliefs, especially, as Yoram was emphasizing, a very public Christian religion that were once widespread.
So the idea that he is critiquing is that it is an invention to believe that America is purely a liberal nation. I don't really know what he means by that, but you can see the undertones of, as we will see in other people, trying to rewrite history. To say that liberalism didn't have an important factor in the founding of the nation, leading to that separation of church and state, is simply mind-boggling. But then he says, what we need to do is that we need to not only acknowledge, we need to rediscover certain pre-liberal beliefs and ideas of public Christianity. Do you see where this is going? This is the academics, but this is going down into the politicians and the activists, and this is the post-liberal society. This is how we continued.
Lastly, the police powers emphasize the central importance of religion in a healthy society. At the time of the American founding, and for much of its history, until very recent times, the latter part of the 20th century, the First Amendment was adopted and understood not to separate church and state, which is a fiction of the invented tradition of American liberalism, but to prevent the national government from interfering in the religious establishment and advancement of religion in their particular localities or their states. In fact, at the time, to protect religious establishments that existed in many states at the time of the American founding. That's why Congress was barred from establishing a religion, because there were state establishments of religion. We tend to forget that we think the First Amendment is about secularization. No, the First Amendment was about protecting religion in the various states and localities. Many state constitutions positively mandated a duty to believe in God as a civic and human duty. Many mandated laws against blasphemy and required observations of the Sabbath. I grew up in Connecticut at a time when there were still things called blue laws, believe it or not. These kinds of mandates on behalf of the common good were common, frequent, and a deep and inherent part of the American tradition.
Do you see where this is leading? I think you do. And I still have a lot of clips to show you, and I will do that, trust me. But there is a rewriting of history. There is no separation of church and state, really. It is to be happen. But notice the example that he was giving about the kind of society that was in previous generations and how it is supposed to be. He was mentioning Sabbath laws. That is going to be something that we will see over and over and over again.
The founding generation understood that only a well-formed and virtuous citizenry would be capable of identifying and selecting public servants who would act on behalf of the common good. To revive this possibility of a virtuous circle, certain authoritative acts will need to be taken, considered, and advanced at the national as well as the state and local levels, in part to restore the prospect for more local political institutions to take on their original role. A constitutive feature of conservatism is a deep realism about the art of the possible. We can never simply return, even if they are eternal truths. We can only and must go forward from where we find ourselves today. The restoration of a common good tradition in America will require a new American revolution. Like our first revolution, we should aim to oust the entrenched oligarchy that has now taken advantage of many of its fellow citizens and put in their place the kind of political leaders supported by the kinds of citizens who, like our forebears, fought and founded a nation in which any liberty worthy of possessing must be advanced by and for a truly common good. Thank you.
Welcome to national conservatism, or welcome to the post-liberal order, where we see that the professor leading the way in academia, trying to influence the politicians, and the politicians listening are seeing that the Sabbath will have to play a role, because it is about the what? A restoration of the common good. This is the restoration of the common good. Philip Longman was saying, can Aristopopulism save us? Patrick Deneen wants to replace corrupt, structurally liberal elites with a new elect of moral guardians. And what does it have to do? He says policy proposals such as religious observance, like mandatory national service and a restoration of blue laws to honor a day of rest on the Sabbath, presumably meaning Sunday and not Saturday. My friends, this is the Adventist scenario. As church and state is uniting for the common good, of course, let's have Sunday laws present in society. Let me introduce you to the National Conservatism Conference, which has been held for 4 or 5 years. And fascinating insights have been given about the post-liberal society that the conservatives want to build. This is what Josh Hawley said, one of the senators of the United States. Interesting. Listen to him.
Say now that I am calling America a Christian nation. And so I am. And some will say that I am advocating Christian nationalism, and so I do.
When you think of this coming state.
So one of the leading senators of the United States coming to the National Conservatism Conference, and he's basically saying that when I'm thinking about United States it's a Christian nation, and he is supporting Christian nationalism. Now, Christian nationalism is this big word that is people are using in order to critique it, in order to do it all kinds of things. This is my definition that I would give of Christian nationalism as I have found it in different ways, because once you see the post-liberal order, you see that Christian nationalism is going to play a pivotal role in establishing that. Christian nationalism is a type of religious nationalism. This is affiliated with Christianity, in which the end goal is to achieve an absolute Christian theocracy within a society. What is a theocracy? It's a society where God is ruling over those individuals through the legislation. So in other words, the Ten Commandments fully and completely legislated. We jumped over this presentation from him because it's all too long, but what he's basically saying just before he says, I'm calling our nation a Christian nation, and I'm saying that I am a Christian nationalist, what he is basically building his philosophical and historical case for that comes from a man called Augustine. Now, Augustine was a church father, and Augustine wrote his book, City of God. And the purpose of the book was twofold. The purpose of the book was to answer or to defend Christianity from the assumptions of pagans who were claiming that the city of Rome was destroyed because it had become Christian. The Visigoth has come and attacked in 410. But another important factor that he is basically trying to put Augustine is that there are two cities in the cosmos. There is the city of heaven, the city of eternity, and then there is the city of the earth. And he's basically saying, how can these two support each other? How can these two combine? And what Augustine is laying down in his book is what other bishops and popes especially are going to develop: the temporal order and the spiritual order, something that we read from Martin Luther, that they are to be separated. This goes back to Augustine. And what Josh Howard is saying is that with the writing of Augustine, and especially establishing this foundation, this laid the foundation for the West for millennium. And I would definitely disagree with it, because the Western world that I am associating myself with is not the oppressive kind of world and system that was. That is not what we would call the West and be proud and supportive of. And then he says that the tradition and legacy of Augustine is what brought the Puritans to the United States to establish a new world. Now, who are the Puritans? I want you to put this on your mind and quickly come to the screen about Augustine. Now, Augustine believed that it was lawful and expedient to use state power to compel the Donatists to convert. Augustine admitted that initially he was of the opinion as follows: "For originally my opinion was that no one should be coerced into the unity of Christ, that we may act only by words, fight only by arguments, and prevail by force of reason, lest we should have those whom we knew as avowed heretics, feigning themselves to be Catholics." Augustine changed and thought that people could be brought to serve God by the fear of punishment or pain. He justified state-sponsored coercion as an act of love to advance his religion. This laid the foundation for religious persecution during the Dark Ages, as I said, and the Inquisition. But God is not pleased with forced worship, as we have seen before. Any attempt to establish true worship by the forceful enactment of laws can only lead to enforced hypocrisy and eventual separation from God and destruction. Now, where does this really idea come from? Listen to Chet Pecknold, who is also one of those Catholic theologians developing a Catholic post-liberal society. Listen to what he said.
The attempt to sort of inoculate ourselves against the problems of liberalism from the beginning, which is constructed basically on a corrupt view of freedom. That liberalism is constructed on this view that freedom, as an Augustinian, you'll permit me a theological point, that a basically Pelagian idea. Pelagius teaches that the root of freedom is choice. Our freedom to choose good or evil. That is the real freedom Pelagius teaches. And Augustine says no to Pelagius. Our only real freedom is the freedom to do the good. And that what is the choice for evil but bondage, slavery, right? Demeaning ourselves, right? That is not true liberty. Yeah. And I think, there was an attempt in America, in the American conservative tradition, to think about ordered liberty as a version of that, an attempt to kind of correct a liberal conception of freedom.
Pecknold, the theologian, is basically saying that he's taking liberalism back to a heretic, Pelagius, who was basically saying that you have the ability to choose. And he says that the freedom to choose good or evil. And he says that this is the bad foundation of liberalism. Is that really the bad foundation of liberalism? And he instead goes with Augustine and says that true freedom is the freedom in Christ. And I agree with it. And these two don't necessarily go against each other. True freedom is only in Christ, but the same Christ has given us freedom to choose whether it is good or whether it is evil. So I am a liberal if it is understood in this context of giving people the opportunity and the freedom to choose for themselves. Now listen to this documentary about the Puritans, because I was telling you about Josh Hawley, who was saying that the Puritans, how good they were. Listen to this.
But by the late 1500s, the Puritans in England and America's first colonies proved to be as strict as the Pharisees in observing the Sabbath.
These were theocratic communities. These were communities that thought they were establishing the rule of God here on earth, and they wanted to follow what they considered to be God's law.
In Massachusetts Bay in the 1600s, simply not working on Sunday was not enough. You couldn't laugh, you couldn't play. You were expected to walk reverently back and forth from church, and that was about it. Unnecessary walking, riding, playing on musical instruments, boating, swimming, and courting were all crimes punishable by fines, whipping, ear-slitting, or hours in the stocks.
And there's even one instance that's recorded in which a sea captain came back after a long interval at sea and kissed his wife on the Sabbath and was severely reprimanded.
As the colonies became the United States, the Sabbath laws remained on the books. In 1789, authorities in Connecticut detained a party for riding on a Sunday. One of the travelers turned out to be George Washington on official business. Even the President of the United States was not above the laws of God.
So this is a documentary detailing the Puritan society that has been accomplished. And notice once again that in this ordered society, God's law had been legislated and people were to keep Sunday holy. This is the Sunday laws, which became part of the state and has been part of it since even after the founding of America. But once again, it all goes back, Sunday laws goes back to the unity of church and state and the very concept that religion can be enforced and legislated. And that's the Adventist scenario. That when people and politicians say that I am a Christian nationalist, that simply means that I want people to follow Christian laws and to worship as I do. And Protestantism has traditionally and historically said no. This is what the founders, John Adams, said. The government of the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. James Madison said the purpose of separation of church and state is to keep forever from these shores the ceaseless strife that has soaked the soil of Europe with blood for centuries. Now, Christian nationalists make fun of the statement separation, the wall of church and state, and the separation, and they say, Washington, or Jefferson, he just wrote it in this letter and nothing else. But this is a phrase that other of the founders had used as well. And they knew, as I said, they were fleeing from Europe. They saw the mistakes during the colonial period. And they said, if we can separate church and state, where the church doesn't go to the state to legislate laws, and where the state doesn't go to the church, and vice versa, he says, we are going to keep this away. And I like how Benjamin Franklin said, he says, when a religion is good, I conceive that it will support itself. I really like that. And when it cannot support itself, and God does not take care to support, so that its professors are obliged to call for the help of the civil power, it is a sign, I apprehend, of its being a bad one. I really like how Benjamin Franklin saw it. You see the perversion of religion when it seeks the state power, when it seeks to implement its message upon the people, when it is the purpose of the church is to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ. And because the church has apostatized, that the church is going to the state, because this apostasy has led to the diminishing of the Holy Spirit. And if you don't have the Holy Spirit, you will have no power to be witness. And as culture is becoming more secular and people are leaving Christianity for many good reasons, and we don't have time to go into all of them. But as that happens, the church should instead go to repentance. But instead, they go with this solution. Give me power over people. Now, how is it today? John MacArthur, pastor, very famous one, how does he think about religious liberty?
I read the other day that one of the evangelical publicists, whatever that is, said he's happy to let us know that the new administration will uphold religious freedom. Really? The new administration will uphold religious freedom? I don't even support religious freedom. Religious freedom is what sends people to hell. To say I support religious freedom is to say I support idolatry. It's to say I support lies. I support hell. I support the kingdom of darkness. You can't say that. No Christian with half a brain would say, we support religious freedom. We support the truth.
You know what sends people to hell? It's not religious liberty. It's sin. Sin is what causes this separation from God, to willfully commit sin and to willfully, rebelliously rejecting the forgiveness and grace and offer of eternity from God. That's what does it. It's not religious liberty. And it's so funny, in a sad way, of course, is that what is it that makes it possible for him to stand in a pulpit and to be able to say this? Religious liberty. In order for him to say no to religious liberty, he must first have religious liberty, you see? He must first have religious liberty in order to say this. So religious liberty has been the bulwark. It has been the very thing which the United States of America has been founded upon. But as prophecy indicated, this is going to turn to another side. Listen to another Christian nationalist, Stephen Wolfe, whom we are going to mention. Listen to what he said about this.
Christian nationalism, as I've presented it, is incompatible with secularism. If Christians get serious, then yeah, we're a threat. I mean, we're a threat to their regime, in the sense that us Christians having power would end that regime. It would end the secularist regime, and there would no longer be religious neutrality.
It is absolutely amazing. He says it is incompatible with it. Of course, his version of Christianity is incompatible with the secular form of government. But as we have seen, this is the Protestant heritage. I understand that there are other Protestants who have thought, but in this line, it has been the liberty of conscience that has been established and celebrated. But instead, when we get into power, they are a threat to us. And so, my friends, we see that Christian nationalism is, in my view, a very, very dangerous threat, which unfortunately is going to spread even in Europe. It's not as strong as in America, much because of the religious atmosphere and milieu that exists in America. But as we go more and more and more in the pendulum, we are going to see this in Europe as well. After all, we saw it in Hungary, we saw in other places. If Europe once must be saved, it has to have Christianity. But my dear friends, I hope you have understood so far that our liberties are God's greatest gifts. And I believe that going this direction is not only what prophecy warns us about, this is the arrival, this is the genesis of a powerful and sad totalitarian regime. Thomas Jefferson said, "I am for freedom of religion and against all maneuvers to bring about a legal ascendancy of one sect over another." That is something that, by the way, Stephen Wolfe was saying. There's not going to be any neutrality. I mean, how can you say that? How can you say that? That has been the very reason for the Dark Ages, as I have said so many times now, and also for the many problems that has existed during the colonial period. And the founders were wise to see that there will be no sect, no religious group over one another. James Madison said, "Congress should not establish a religion and enforce the legal observation of it by law, nor compel men to worship God in any manner contrary to their," what is the word? Conscience. Contrary to their conscience. Now, I've been speaking about the national conservatism, remember? And we are going to see a couple of clips. Yoram Hazony, he's an Israeli-American philosopher, and he's the chairman of Edmund Burke Foundation. And he's the leader for the National Conservatism Conference. This is fascinating. I really must admit it. So we have seen from Denny, we have seen from Josh Hawley about Christian nationalism and the common good and all of it. Now he is a Jew. He's a Jew. And he has some important insights to tell us. He held a presentation called "Make the Ten Commandments Your Symbol." What was that about?
But I think that the state of Louisiana has actually come up with a pretty darn good test of whether you're a conservative or not. And here it is. And don't think I'm talking about something trivial. I know you're thinking it, but don't think it. Just hold on. The state of Louisiana has come up with a simple law that the 10 Commandments should be posted in every classroom in the state. The 10 Commandments. So I would think that you couldn't possibly be a conservative and have a problem with the 10 Commandments being posted on the walls of your kid's school. How can you have a problem with it? The 10 Commandments, that's like the founding moral law of our civilization for 3,000 years, right? So it's just what we all agree on, or what we did until a few years ago. Like Protestants and Catholics can agree to it, and they can agree with Jews, and I think probably even conservative Muslims and Hindus they can probably say, yeah, that's pretty good for you Westerners. It's the only thing we can agree on. If we can't agree on that, then there's nothing we can agree on. Now everybody is reacting to the state of Louisiana. And by the way, Texas and Oklahoma are working on Bible curriculums for the public schools. So look, I know everybody's got a reason to oppose this. Everybody's got some crazy reason to oppose it. America, struggling to figure out why we just can't have the 10 Commandments on the walls of the kids' schools, is a fly in a fly bottle, buzzing around, bouncing off the walls. Oh, we've got all these principles. We've got separation of church and state. And I say to you, just knock it off. Get out of the bottle. Just put the 10 Commandments on the kids' walls. And then somebody says, oh, no, but the state has to be neutral. And I say to you, get out of the fly bottle. Just get it. Just put it on the walls.
So in the post-liberal order, in which many of these thinkers are favoring religion, I don't have any problem with that because I favor religion as well. But how do they look into separation of church and state? Is that something they look up to? Is that something that they support? Absolutely not. Just put the 10 Commandments on the wall. Usually when this topic comes up, I laugh a little bit because I was raised in Sweden, I must admit, most secular country in the world. I became Christian in high school, which is interesting. So I was thinking to myself, if a Muslim would probably say that I want to put Islamic law or Sharia laws onto the walls of our children, would they applaud the same way? Of course not. I mean, don't kid ourselves. It's all about presenting the Judeo-Christian way as privileged as over the other religions. And I also find it interesting that they are trying to save society and the Western civilization by putting the law, the tablets of the stones, upon the walls. Now in the Bible, this is the Old Covenant mentality. What is the Old Covenant mentality? The Old Covenant mentality is to simply enforce the law upon you, and you are going to do it. Now, the New Covenant mentality is that as you accept Christ as your Savior, He gives you a new heart, and in that new heart, God is putting His law. In other words, it is not coming from outward factor, it comes from the inside. It comes from inward motivation. I want to follow God, not because I want to be saved, but because I am saved. So this is fascinating because, to be honest, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, and I have preached God's law, and I have preached the 10 Commandments probably more than any other people. Like, I really love God's law. But this is not the way to do it. The way to do it is to invite them to see Christ. That's the purpose of the law. Paul says that the purpose of the law is Christ. It is to point you towards Him. Not only just to be how to become a moral person, but it is how it connects me to Christ. And I find it fascinating that the Ten Commandments, as he said, and as I think we will see in the next presentation, next clip, the Ten Commandments, he says, has to be the symbol for our movement. And as a Seventh-day Adventist, as I said, I believe in the Ten Commandments, all of the 10, including the 4th. And so could it be that at the end of time, there's going to be God's law and there's going to be man's law? Absolutely. That's what we have been teaching. And no wonder the book of Revelation at least twice mentions that God's people at the end of time, the remnant faithful, in Revelation 12:17 and Revelation 14 verse 12, the Bible says that they are the ones who keep the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus. Fascinating developments.
I think a movement needs a flag. You look at that rainbow flag, and it keeps growing and changing. A movement needs symbols. The American flag is a wonderful symbol. Americans should fly it everywhere as much as you can. But what kind of American are you? If you're an American who believes that America is anchored to Christian civilization, to Jewish and Christian civilization, if you believe that that is what shaped and formed and gave life and meaning and purpose to America, then you cannot be embarrassed to have the 10 Commandments displayed. Let's make the 10 Commandments our symbol. Put it up, not just in the schools, just put it up everywhere. What kind of American are you? I'm the kind of American who believes that there is a fundamental moral basis to civilization, and we actually know what it is. That's clarity. If we can get to that, that would be clear. 10 Commandments, that's us. That would be clarity.
Did you hear how he phrased it? He said at least 2 things that are worthy to comment on. Number 1, he said that what kind of American are you if you do not follow the 10 Commandments? What kind of American are you if you do not acknowledge the supreme role of the 10 Commandments? Do you hear where it is leading? This is the common good thinking. If you do not fall into the common good, if you do not fall into that, well, what's going to happen to you? And my friends, the idea of not wanting the 10 Commandments to be published in schools, it has nothing to do with me somehow not feeling okay about it or somehow thinking that it's a bad thing. It's simply about that there is a religious neutrality in society. And just as I don't want an Islamic Sharia law to be put up on the wall if in my school or in my children's school, or it's Hindu or whatever, satanic, whatever, there is to be that kind of a factor. But see, the 10 Commandments, fascinating love, is the foundation of the movement, they say, the symbol. Now, Yoram Hazony wrote a book called Conservatism and a Rediscovery. He says this foregrounding of God, not him, this is an article commenting, but this foregrounding of God in the Bible is the most distinctive feature of Hazony's version of conservatism. Do you see? Conservatism not only leading to nationalism, but to religion, and especially the Bible. For him, all 10 of the commandments ought to be the basis for our nation's social and political life. Now, we have seen historically that has been a big mistake when all the 4 are done, especially in Christendom. This position was uncontroversial in the West for many centuries, but today it is held by virtually no other prominent Western political thinker, with the notable exception of Benedict XVI. Obviously, he's a pope. As Hazony argues, One of the chief reasons for the dissolution that is visible everywhere in the Western nation today is the fact that principles such as the public acknowledgement of God, the honor given to parents by their adult children, loyalty within marriage, and observance of the Sabbath have been banished from public life and relegated to the private sphere. Hazony goes so far as to accuse the American founders of having failed to appreciate this point sufficiently. And he offers the dire prediction that the American nation will not endure without a return of religion to public life. This is the Adventist scenario, that church and state is going to unite, and Sabbath laws, Sunday laws, are going to be implemented upon society in order to turn people back to God. Now imagine if black swan events, crisis events would fall, so-called judgments of God, earthquakes, and natural disasters would happen. This is how quick people become religious in crisis events. And people realize, wow, we need to turn back to God. And here we see the leader of the National Conservative Conference movement, a Jew, saying, let's legislate the Ten Commandments and let the Protestants lead the way.
A lot of people are very uncomfortable with the idea that religion should be integrated into the state. That there shouldn't be a separation of church and state. Now, I'm not uncomfortable with it. I actually think that the separation of church and state doesn't become an important piece of the American Constitution as a principle until the 1940s. And it doesn't really triumph until the 1960s. And so separation of church and state is, I think, something that is recent and has harmed Americans and the West generally to a very great degree. So it doesn't bother me at all that that people want to rethink that. I think it's crucial to rethink that. And in fact, in the 1980s, that was somebody like Chief Justice Rehnquist. That's what he stood for. It's time to rethink that because we made a mistake in the 1940s, and we have to go back and find a different way.
Now let me quickly mention to you this man, Rusty Reno. He's the editor of First Things. Check out First Things magazine. It's one of the most popular and well-established journals that are writing about religious issues and political issues and so on. And Rusty Reno is a convert to Catholicism. He wrote a book resurrecting the idea of a Christian society, and we are going to come back to Rusty Reno later on when we will see the Catholic version of Christian nationalism. But listen to the tone of listen to the message that he presented at the conference.
Throughout his pontificate, John Paul II warned of the dangers of societies without transcendence. In retrospect, the main thrust of Catholic social teaching after the Second Vatican Council has been to try to save the liberal West from its self-destructive excesses by grounding the modern quest for freedom in the larger, perennial, and far more fundamental human quest for transcendence. So in conclusion, Texas, Oklahoma, and Florida have mandated biblical literacy for school children. Louisiana will require the display of the Ten Commandments in schools. These modest measures, I submit, move America in the right direction. And no Catholic, I think, in his right mind could object. On the contrary, we should be cheerleading. The ideology of strict separation has done great damage to our society. So, if I may draw from the words of Ronald Reagan, Justice Roberts, tear down that wall.